Welcome to the Payments Trilogue, where three seasoned professionals discuss payments and more for Europe and beyond.
Hello, my name is Michael Salmony, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Payments Trilogue, where Xavier and Ralph now have a guest today, Torbjörn, who's head of the EPSG. This is one of the many European Gremia fora that we have, and I must admit, I know very little about it. Apparently, it used to be for cards, coordinate sort of cards activity in Europe, which makes me ask, why doesn't EMVCo already cover that? But now it's doing more than cards. It's doing also instant and SEPA, which makes me ask, why doesn't already EPC and ERPB and various other ones do that? So Torbjörn, welcome to that. Maybe you can educate us and explain what is the reason for your organization.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my name is Torbjörn Furubjelke. I work for Nordea Bank situated in Stockholm, Sweden, but we are a Nordic bank with head office nowadays in Helsinki in Finland, due to the Euro connection, but we are truly Nordic bank, and we don't feel Finnish or Swedish, etc. But I'm Swedish and work in Stockholm, and have done so for almost 25 years now, mainly focusing on cards. So that card payments is the sector I'm coming from. I worked in both acquiring and issuing, business development, and with mobile and e-commerce payments also, but with a card focus all the time. And Nordea is the largest bank in the Nordics and one of the largest banks in Europe. Then I'm not head of EPSG because we don't have any heads or general directors or anything like that. I'm currently the chairman of the board, which doesn't mean that I know everything that is performed in the association. We have a lot of experts in different expert teams, and we have a volume subgroup that coordinates most of the work on the SEPA standardization that we collect in the volume. But to explain the background for EPSG, it all and the difference from EPC, etc., it's actually not that separate from EPC, because the whole thing was started by EPC, European Payments Council. When EPC was formed, it decided, as you know, to create the SEPA schemes for account payments, transfers and direct debits in euro. And then the question was what to do about cards and card payments. It was realized at that time, I was not involved at that time, but as I've been told, it was realized that, yeah, we already have Visa, MasterCard, and a lot of national schemes currently already in place in Europe, and quite maturely so. So what is the problem? It's the lack of harmonization in the market that, for instance, merchants might have to have different terminals, that the terminals for card payments needs to be certified in each country and cannot have a license for every country in Europe, etc. So, and a lot of other things that at that time was seen as a need for harmonization. So EPC then decided to firstly create a SEPA card framework, which was on a more high-level description of what is needed to harmonize the market for card payments in Europe, which many of those things, like separation of scheme and processing, that you don't have to be licensed as acquirer for every country, etc., was more or less realized also by the interchange fee regulation. So this is a document that is no longer in practical use. But what was then realized was also that we needed some kind of more prescriptive requirements for standards for card payments in Europe in order to achieve the harmonization. So we don't actually work with standards. To be precise, we work on requirements on standards. So for instance, that is the difference between EPSG requirements and EMVCo standards, because we then can request or require things that is needed for achieving the harmonization in the European market, also to EMVCo. One example is, for instance, when we had the PSD or the IFR requesting that merchants should be able to separate their acceptance on 4 different types of cards: debit cards, credit cards, prepaid cards, and corporate cards. So then we needed a new product identifier in the standard to be applied in the cards and for merchants to identify that, so that they can were able to make the separation. So that was a requirement that we made then in our standard requirements, and then EMVCO introduced that in their standard.
So could I just ask you something on that? Because well, the what used to be the ECSG, Card Stakeholder Group, has this large, it's actually a 10-book volume, isn't it? So it's not just some requirements.
It's seven books, but
a lot.
Yeah, it's 7 books, and it's now it's seven books in the volume of requirements, and a couple of annexes like the tokenization annex, etc. But so it's a lot. But what was your question about that?
Yeah, well, what is the lot? Because I think you have all these 7 books. What are they about?
Yeah, as I said, there are requirements on standards for card payments. So if you are a standard provider or specification provider, you can look into this and see that you are, so to say, SEPA compliant, so that we achieve harmonization, so that we can have a terminal provider can make a terminal that is certified in one place in Europe and can be used everywhere in Europe for all the different schemes, Visa, MasterCard, and Amex, and also the national schemes, as long as these also follow these requirements. But going back to the history there, the EPC realized that after a time that EPC was not able to do this by their own, so they invited other stakeholders that are now in EPSG, which is a stakeholder group, that's the SG. So that started already in 2009 as an informal association or setup, which was called Card Stakeholder Group, but it was all managed by EPC, and the intellectual property rights were by EPC, etc. So that stage lasted until 2016, where CSG was reformed as a separate association, which was renamed as European Card Stakeholder Group, ECSG, which is then a separate association with equal shares from the 5 different stakeholder groups. That is the PSPs, payment service providers, PSPs as defined in PSD2, PSD1, banks and payment institutions, etc. And also now, of course, TPPs. And as one sector, represented by EPC as the only member in that sector, which is organizing all of these different payment service providers. And then also the retailers, the schemes, the merchants, the schemes, retailers, processors, and vendors. Which were already done. The setup for.
Sorry, can I just stop you, because I'm sorry, I'm just not understanding why we need your organization, to put it bluntly. Every country has merchants, has credit cards, debit cards, prepaid cards, tokenized cards. EMVCO takes care of that, and various other things. What is unique to Europe? Why we need a European organization to standardize that or to certify that, or whatever you're doing? I'm just not getting the essence of what your raison d'etre is, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I'll try to explain that. There were, especially at the time when it was this work was formed. And again, as I said, it was initiated by EPC to create a single euro payments market also for card payments, and it was addressing the lack of harmonization in the different setups, which was actually very national when it comes to things like processing and terminals, etc. So there was a need for this harmonization of these standards and specifications for and certification processes, etc.
But there are global standards,
which is also in a.
Why does one need that? But there are global standards like EMV. There are already European organizations like ERPP. There are European processors like Worldline. What is the difference that you're adding?
Maybe I can help here with giving an example.
Thank you.
I think in those days, the ambition was to make it feasible that any card could work on any terminal, any European card on any European terminal, which was not the case. I remember very vividly the example provided by European Parliament members traveling from Brussels to Strasbourg and not being able to pay with their debit cards the tramway in Strasbourg. And this was something that could not be accepted. And therefore you needed this, and the claim was to make feasible any card on any terminal. And I think that gave way to the whole idea.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I fully understand that, but it doesn't work to this day, right? You can't use a Gyro card in any country except Germany, and the Barcard Bancaire only works in France. So if that was the goal, I'm not seeing that has been achieved in any way.
Yeah, I mean, technically, I guess it could. It's about what acceptance you have and the commercial agreements you have with your acquirer. But I mean, from a technical viewpoint, they should be of the same standard. So if there is a commercial ambition to expand Eurocard outside Germany and Carte Bancaire outside France, then it's technically possible. But then there's commercial decisions to be made by both schemes and merchants and acquirers, etc., to do so.
Yeah, so I think it has added the technology on the terminals, like different kernels as well. So I think it's about the requirements, not the standards. So it's about to tell the standards what to change, what to add, what to remove, how to evolve, how to make it more European, and all of that. So, but sorry, back to you, Torbjörn.
Yeah, and I mean the things you mentioned, like ERPB, etc., didn't exist at that time. Of course, the things have evolved. This was like 20 years ago. But what also has been useful, I think, is to cater for European legislation, which has been quite extensive in the payments field, and especially for card payments in the last decades with PSD 1 and 2 and interchange fee regulation, not least. And again, I mean, it's also about discussing how to implement these things with all the stakeholder groups. Then a question that sometimes pops up, both in my bank and with other banking people I meet that are involved in card issuing, especially. Why don't I know anything about EPSG and these requirements? Yeah, that is because many of the things that we agree on in consensus in formerly ECSG, then now EPSG on the card side, is implemented in the scheme rules and scheme compliance changes that you are very aware of as a product manager for card issuing. But you don't realize that we have in this forum with all the stakeholders been able in a non-competitive environment discuss and agree on these things, and then Visa, MasterCard, and the national schemes implement these requirements. For instance, to cater for the IFR, as I mentioned before, or with the strong customer authentication rules with PSD2, which requires quite a lot of different details in the infrastructure to work in the way that the legislator required. So these are examples that are more recent, what the use has been in the card area. But then, as you maybe indicate, card payments are now a quite mature product, and many of these things work more or less fine. But what has been something that some of the stakeholder groups, especially the retailers, the end users, so to say, among our stakeholder groups, have requested for a long time is the expansion on this setup from card payments, the narrow scope of card payments from the beginning to all types of retail payments that can be accepted at the point of interaction, and especially then mobile instant payments that have emerged in different ways and forms in different countries in EU and Europe. So that has actually been discussed several times since ECSG was launched as a separate association in 2016, but was reacted both 1 and 2 times, especially by EPC, the PSP side, until we finally made that decision in late 2022, I think, to expand the scope to all retail payments. And that has been, since we also then at the end of 22 released the last full version of the volume, which is only for the volume 10.0, which is still only focused on card payments. Then we have in this... Sorry?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that your organization was formed before some other European fora were there, and I understand that. But you say in 2022, you expanded your scope beyond cards to also include other means of paying at the point of sale. At that point, the ERP already did exist. In fact, there has been a study for PIS at POS and all sorts of other things of how to do the point of sales experience. So again, sorry to keep asking the same question. What difference do you add to those things that are already happening in other fora?
Yeah, that we have the same way of forming requirements and standards with all the stakeholder groups involved. Don't think the ERPB has this kind of detailed set of requirements on how things are working on the point of interaction. Then I guess they are also addressing other things that we are not looking into in EPSG, which is especially for the payments focused on the interaction in the point of interaction.
If I could tell a side story here on that subject, because firstly maybe a little disclosure that I am actually at the moment on the board.
So maybe it's useful.
Torbjörn is chairing and representing, well, not just ETPBA, but also actually the whole PSP stakeholder group on behalf of the EPC. But I had, going back to this 2022, we had big concerns. Actually, when the EPC decided to sort of hand over the instant payments, mobile instant payments requirements part to the ECSG, as it was called at the time, we were the only board member on the EPC voting against that, because we thought, well, come on, now we're finally getting some competition for cards on the go. And now why should we basically hand this over and let the fox guard the hen house? So that was our big concern. And the decision was done by the EPC. The board decided against. Well, as I said, we were the only one voting against, but then we as an organization, ETPBA, we then also followed that and said, then let's work with the ECSG and accompany that change from cards to payments in more general. And now looking back, I can say that I think it was the right decision. I think this card stakeholder group was accommodating the instant payments quite well. So it wasn't the card scheme sort of working against it. And also, by the way, there were all the other stakeholder groups like the vendors, the merchants, and the processors, etc. So they have all actually a vested interest in account to account as well. And so this has then led to new working groups as part of the EPSG, which is especially about making it possible to use account to account on these card terminals. So basically turning a card terminal into a payments terminal and defining the requirements. And of course, this requires a lot of technical detail that is, of course, far beyond what the ERPB would be talking about.
If I may, Torbjörn, get deeper on one aspect, which is how do you understand the argument about the lack of sovereignty in payments in Europe, or the need to strengthen sovereignty in European payments? What message do you get and how do you react to it?
Do you mean EPSG as association? Or, this is, of course, a hot topic and a lot of...
Is there any impact?
If you ask two people in the business, you get three answers, I guess. So, it's...
Does it have any impact?
As association, of course, Sorry?
Does it have any impact in the association, this debate, this public debate?
Not directly. Then of course, it's already part of kind of what we set out to do in 2022, that we also include instant payments at the point of interaction to get these requirements in order for this to be harmonized and more or at least possible to be interoperable. And also harmonized with the card requirements at the point of interaction. So I mean, it's facilitating that, and that is what we have been working with closely in 3 years now. Our usual cycles are 3 years. Now we have used 3 years to come up with this. Just recently, this 10.5 version for public consultation, which is the normal step in the process, so that we can publish the first volume, the number 11, then integrating also instant payments. I mean, of course, this debate on independence, etc., has been more recent and not directly influencing the work, and we have had quite a lot of discussions on how to because this, as Ralph indicated, this was quite complex to integrate this with existing requirements on card payments and to make it harmonized use of terms and terminology and so on to make this work. So there have been a strong focus on that. But of course, it's in essence there to facilitate also these different instant payment schemes to become more interoperable. Then, of course, these schemes need to, as they are now doing, also discuss this in a more practical and commercial way with the recent, for instance, announcement that the EPI and the schemes involved in EuroPA are working on making their different schemes interoperable by the end of this year for P2P payments. But it's not. I mean, EPSG is in the non-competitive space, and it's not for us to kind of implement or launch any actual commercial solutions in that sense. But hopefully, what we are producing can facilitate this. Yeah.
Yeah, if I may add that, so I mean, having been part of some of these working groups there, I think it is very constructive to look at the wider goal of making account-to-account payments. So I obviously have represented the open banking view and how the flows would work or should work on, especially at POS, or physical retail payment stores, and how to make open banking work there. But then, of course, there is guys from EPI, from Europa, from others that are involved. And I think the big advantage of having this here at the EPSG is that we also have all the other stakeholders, which are, of course, playing a role, the merchants and I mentioned the terminal vendors and other schemes. So therefore, the discussion at the end is much more comprehensive and closer to a solution than if it just discussing it inside the EPC, which is just looking at the banks or the PSP perspective.
Would you agree with that, Torbjörn, or do you want to add anything?
No, I agree with what Ralph said. Then was that the answer to your question also, Xavier?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Certainly, what I would like to underline is that even the EPSG is also a cooperative vehicle. So it's addressing those issues that could be addressed through cooperation, and all competitive aspects are left aside. Of course, in that sense, it is limited because it is focusing on some aspects, and others are for others to be dealt with.
Exactly.
Okay. I think our time is gradually coming to an end. So unless there's anything else that needs to be discussed, I would like to thank Torbjörn for elucidating us the existence of EPSG, yet another organization with 4 letters beginning with E. I think a number of people looking at our podcast from outside think we in Europe are a bit mad how many fora we have, but I think we understand a little bit better what you're doing. I was particularly taken by the idea of this sort of roaming for national cards, right? You didn't put it that way, but that's what I'm hearing, right? Like a sort of EuroPA for cards, right? So that I can use my German card in Belgium and the French card in Poland. That sort of sounds like an interesting concept, but I understand you're doing the technical work and not the commercial work. And I'm also not seeing a huge amount of that happening. I think there was one transaction where a gyro card was used in France.
Just to comment on that, as I mentioned also, I think card payments are a very mature product, and all of these schemes that we see today emerged in the 80s and 90s. And I think, I mean, even if there has been initiatives in the past, and also EPI or EPI started with the intention of launching a new European debit card scheme. I see it hard to focus on this very mature product and compete in any way with existing schemes, including Visa and MasterCard, which then it's better to do something new, like with the instant payments, and see how that is complementing and competing with the card schemes.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And we did see that EPI 1.0, which tried to do a pan-European card, sort of also discovered how difficult that is. No, fair
and
point.
I think the final blow to that idea was actually the IFR with the interchange fee caps. You can't really start a new big scheme with the capped interchange. But that's my point of view.
Okay. No, thank you. That's really helpful. All right. So again, thank you, Torbjörn and Javier and Ralph. And I hope we managed to cast some light on yet another 4-digit something organization. Thank you for watching.
Many thanks for watching and listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Looking forward to seeing you again next time.